Before I move on to the meat of the video, I'm going to first share a little story of something I experienced in the last few days. I was walking down the street in my neighborhood, and as is custom, oftentimes there are Amnesty International workers handing out leaflets and flyers and trying to recruit people to their cause, essentially get money out of them. And the vast majority of the time, I avoid them. I walk past, and one guy was being particularly petulant and annoying, and so I decided to entertain him and what have you. End up wasting half an hour plus of my time. Regardless, the course of the conversation was as follows: explaining the circumstances, what they're doing, and I tend to be very blunt. I said, "How much money do you want from me?" And I kept on repeating, and then he just gave up and said, "Oh, he wants about between 300 and 350 euros a year." And I tried to explain to him the problem of his approach and the problem of what they're doing. I used accessible terms. I talked about things like cultural differences and economy and economics and what have you. I didn't talk about genetics or IQ or, God's forbid, consanguinity and inbreeding. And he was just lost. I could see it in his face, adrift at sea, as it were. His colleague piped in as well, female, of African descent, it seemed. And eventually, long story short, I was called a racist and what have you. Never talked about race in that particular conversation. Talked about lack of integration and the welfare state, and long term, it's not feasible. And every now and then I'll have these sort of mainstream interactions. I think the alt-right refers to these people as normies, and it's a useful term, so I'll adopt it too, these normies. Dealing with normies is difficult, and there's no basis for conversation, and there certainly is no common ground. And that particular episode illustrated to me, yet again, how dire the situation is long term for the West. And I told you that to just give you an idea of what is really going on. Because the fact of the matter is that I don't see too many solutions. People are living in a different plane of existence, so-called normies. Even the most harmless, simple arguments about the lack of viability economically of importing massive third world labor, lack of education, cultural differences, lack of integration, without ever mentioning anything about genetics or anything like that, or IQ, it's a disconnect, an immediate disconnect. And most recently, the CSU in Germany, a political party, asked Merkel to tone it down with immigration, set an upper limit of about 200,000 a year, and she refused. And now we come to the United States and Hillary and Trump. Now, I'm skeptical of both candidates, and frankly speaking, I don't see this figure of salvation in one Trump the same way so many people do, particularly on the alt-right. There are limits in what can be done. Trump is, I suppose, useful for breaking the cover of political correctness, and as many of you know, if I had to identify one major goal on my channel, it would be essentially working towards breaking political correctness and the stranglehold that it places on us and our inability to discuss certain topics. Because our inability to discuss certain topics leads to situations such as Amnesty International workers tell me I'm a racist merely for citing economic facts and economic reality. But what would be the ultimate net benefit of a Trump win? I don't really see that much. I mean, I'll give you an example. Recently, Obama signed off about $38 billion in a 10-year period to Israel because of our delightful relationship with that country. Now, I'm not one of these people who say we only give money to Israel. We don't. We give money to lots of different people, mostly just to appease them, Egypt or what have you. I think we give money to Egypt so they won't attack Israel. There are other reasons why they don't do it, but whatever. And we know that Trump has a daughter that married a Jewish guy who's apparently religious, so now ties to Israel. So I look at the alt-right and I'm thinking, what exactly is Trump going to do that really steers the country away from the course? The only useful thing I think he's doing is just allowing people to more or less act up and speak their minds, which is good. And on the other hand, if Clinton gets into office, then I suppose there'll be a bit of acceleration for everything. I don't think it'll be the end of the world, but people will get tired of the political correctness and the inability to speak one's mind. But what I'm trying to communicate here is that everyone who tunes into this channel are channels that are similar, or at least that there's some crossover with. The reality is that the world of the normies, it's completely alien. None of the things that we talk about here, none of the things that other people talk about in related channels, has any context, any place, any platform in the normies' worldview. Yeah, to use the German term, their Weltanschauung. Their Weltanschauung, which is a view of the world. It's just alien. It doesn't have a spot. You can't even talk about economic reality with them. Somehow, some way, we're going to shuttle in all these migrants and immigrants and everything's going to be fine. Even if you were to just stick to the economic arguments, there are arguments against that. Never mind the consanguinity possibilities as well as the IQ issues, which are, of course, related to the economics, but hey, neither here nor there. And I guess I had that conversation with these people to remind me that the world I travel in, the world of my work on YouTube and internet in general, where I do all my work, is alien to the quote-unquote normal world. The things we talk about. Most people have quote-unquote normal conversations. They're not concerned with this stuff, as long as it doesn't directly affect them. And I do see a trend in Germany of people joining, say, like AfD, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, because they've been personally affected, either through vandalism or muggings or just fear in general, related to the migration crisis. But that's the thing. People don't see the bigger picture, or they get lost in ideological fervor like these workers for Amnesty International, citing things from the United Nations and what have you. I mean, totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the United Nations says. We're talking about long-term prospects for Western Europe, economically, primarily in this context. So what good can Trump really do? The problem is the status quo is so entrenched that he couldn't really do anything that would veer so far away from that it would change the very fabric of society and civilization and government. The other thing is, and something that not many people think about, we live in a very delicate world these days. Our state of interconnectedness vis-a-vis the internet, it has primacy in everyone's life, certainly anyone who's involved in the YouTube scene. And this has a tremendous effect on things, because it's not like you can just radically shift paradigms the same way you could 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I mean, there's a reason, there are many reasons, but the particular context and lack of technological innovation that gave rise to some of the worst movements in the early and mid-20th century. That's lacking now. I'm not saying we want to resurrect that, but there's a fragility to how we do things. And so there could be a domino effect, potentially, if things were radically changed. The internet has been both a boon and a bane to us in many ways. And so I just don't see things really changing due to a Trump presidency. And I look at his behavior and his interactions with people, and there's another argument to be made that, he's just a buffoon. And sometimes I think that. Sam Harris has made some pretty vicious arguments against Trump. And I think partially he's right. But regardless, I think if Bush could handle the presidency, then Trump can too. It's just I don't see any radical change. And sometimes it takes a conversation on the ground with so-called normies to get you back on your feet and realize, hey, everything I'm doing here is very much limited to a small inner sphere of the world that has nothing to do with the rest of the world. It is a kind of realization of impotence, and it makes me rather fond of my days of apathy regarding many of these issues. But I think things will continue on as they're continuing on, and there will be very little change. These discussions that we have will continue, but I think we all need to, this is the main point of this video, be cognizant that the blue pill world, or the world of normies, is alien, and it has almost no crossover with this world. It's very much like dimensional travel. It's all of us, you're walking down the street, and all of a sudden you're in a conversation with someone whose worldview is so ideologically driven and also false, I think, not accurate and not reflective of the facts and the data, that a productive conversation isn't just a nigh impossibility, it is an impossibility. And I see this all the time. I was watching a talk given by Amy Chua and Jeff Bloom, these pundits, these lawyer pundits from Yale, and about the triple package and how cultures produce, immigrants from different cultures produce certain outcomes and blah blah. They never mention IQ once. They relegate it to a footnote, and I find that interesting and sad. It's just strange. It's just a very strange circumstance we're finding ourselves in. Now, does that mean I'm just going to stop what I'm doing and just going to give up? No. I mean, we have to soldier on, and we have to press forward in trying to understand the world. Eventually, I think, when the shit really hits the fan, all of this will be useful. All the things we've discussed, all the data, whether it's sex differences or related to immigration or whatever, it's going to be relevant because it is compelling. I don't even think half the time it's interesting, but it is compelling. But I think the world of the normie, the other world, is alien to a lot of us. And many of you, of course, travel in these circles and you're familiar with these aliens. But I don't see any radical change being brought about by Trump. I think it will be business as usual at best, and maybe something else. And I don't see too much changing with Clinton either. Well, obviously not. If only, well, she will accelerate the process, I think. So my perspective on the rather dismal future of actually changing the fabric of society. The internet, for all its power, seems to have very little impact on this stuff when it comes to the day-to-day. Well, there will be more material in the not-too-distant future. Next week I have to live in a hotel, effectively, because my landlord is renovating my living room and building a balcony, much to my chagrin. And subsequently, I will have to start looking for a new place. So I won't be able to do any work next week, although I will be scripting stuff for the future. Everyone, thanks for tuning in, and apologies if I'm sounding grim at the moment, but it's not looking good. It certainly is not. I'll check you guys out later, and may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.